Hey everybody, Eric Dorward here at the Spartan Rocketry Club, continuing my build here of the Estes Optima Pro, our mid-power rocket here. So it took a very long time, but all the fins are sanded down, shaped. I did shape the 3 out of 4 sides instead of just the 2 that the instructions recommend. They're probably passable, I guess, but considering that this is pretty hard plywood, it took a really long time, probably like 100 strokes at least in each direction to get it most of the way done. I also did then just take a quick pass over the fin too. The nice thing about working with plywood is that the grain isn't that bad, so probably won't take all that much to get these fins ready for flight and looking pretty decent. So there, put aside. I also did these little guys. So all that's taken care of. It was really quite fun. It actually took hours. Hours of me doing other stuff and just kind of futzing around with them in the background. But still hours nonetheless. Today's main goal is we are going to build the engine mount, which is also going to take, well, it's not going to take hours, but it is, we've got the last of the wood pieces here. Before we do that though, I'm going to finish up this bulkhead that we were working on earlier. So it's got this hole in it, and all this stuff is glued into place at this point. But what I do need to do is put this eye hook in place. So this just gets screwed in, and personally I don't really want to spin the eye hook if I can help it, so I'm just going to spin the tube. It's a little easier. I'm going to push this in most of the way, and then I'm going to take it out. The instructions actually don't say to do this, but this is kind of my standard operating procedure. I want to make sure this is in nice and snugly. There is a decent amount of wood in there just in case, but I'm going to add a little bit of glue to this, just wood glue. A bead right over top of that hole, and I screwed it in once already to kind of pre-drill it, as it were, so that this is, I'm only trying to do one thing at a time here, basically. And that's in so far enough for the threads of the screw to all be hidden. I'm just going to spin this around quickly. Yeah, I did end up doing a little bit of damage to the wood right there. Kind of cracked a little bit. That's why it's reinforced though. If you wanted to, you could probably put a little more glue around that. It's probably not that big a deal. You could probably also hit it with a little bit of a more rigid glue if you wanted to, like CA, or put a dab of epoxy on there when we do that. But a little bit of wood glue is probably adequate. This is pretty strong. It is going to have to resist the full shock of the weight when the rocket separates, but I suspect that will be fine. This is a pretty strong piece of metal. Alright, so that's good. Now it is time to actually build the motor mount. I'm not entirely sure how much of this we're going to get done in one sitting, because it might be the case that I need to stop and let things dry, but that kind of depends on how snugly things fit. Alright, so first things first, I have the nose cone, ironically. This green bit right here is going to go on the outside of the engine tube like this, and it's pretty snug right now. We don't actually need it to be that snug. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the nose cone, we're just going to kind of ram the thing onto the nose cone and push down. This is to try to kind of loosen it up and separate it a little bit. That should probably be enough, and then, yeah, there we go. Now it slides on quite easily. So, great. Alright, now, the instructions on this are actually a little odd for engine mounts. They're odd because I don't actually need to measure anything, which honestly makes me a little uncomfortable just on general principle. But that's okay. We don't actually need to, because we're going to use other things to basically gauge how much space we need. So first things first, I'm going to take one of these rings. They're all identical, by the way, so use them interchangeably. And this is going to go on, and it's going to slide all the way down so that the green tube is flush with one end. So that's great. The green tube is not going to live there. not permanently anyway. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to glue the first ring in place right here. I'm going to do this, eventually I'm going to put glue on both sides. But I'm going to start off with just putting what is, what is essentially just a big fillet. And I'm going to put this fillet right around, it's not quite open, there we go, right around the, glue's a little clogged today, I'll have to clean that out at some point, there we go, that should do it, right around the edge of it here. You could, I suppose, if you really wanted to, completely clog the glue. That's great too. There we go. Yeah, I got a little glue clog in here. This has been happening with some regularity, I think, because I haven't been as careful as I could have been about closing glue after I was done with it, which is kind of dumb, I will admit, but it's also pretty easy to fix. So I just used a paper clip to clean out the goop. Wipe that off. That ought to take care of things. Anyway, yeah, there we go, that's much better. Anyway, back to whatever it was I was saying before things got clogged. You might consider putting the glue down directly onto the tube and then sliding the glue or the ring through it. There's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of a time-honored traditional way of doing this kind of thing. What you really don't want to do is tack this in place with the green ring still on it. So this, I've had these that weren't cut super accurately and they were very wobbly, and I needed to leave the green ring in place to hold things in place, because as soon as I would move it, it would just fall off. That doesn't seem to be the case this time. I am going to be careful with it though, just careful not to bump it. I do want to end up tacking it in place from both sides, like so. So definitely remove the green ring before you do that, because otherwise you will have glued it in place. Oops, I just bumped it. That's not great. There we go. Alright, so obviously be gentle with this until it's set. You might consider just tacking in one side and then letting it set. That would not be the world's worst idea. Truthfully though, this one, well, it matters, but it doesn't matter that much. So, whatever. We just want this, ultimately what needs to happen here is this piece needs to be set far enough so that you can get the motor retainer, that's this thing, over the edge of it. So that's plenty of space. In fact, it's a little more than I need. I'm going to let this sit for a moment. This I'm not going to do anything with until the very end, once everything's painted. Anyway, since I'm letting this sit just to kind of set a little bit before I do the next part, it is worth mentioning that I am not going to just rely on the wood glue as the main support here, the main adhesive. I'm going to follow the instructions. I'm going to glue everything in nicely here. But then in the next video, I'm going to reinforce this with epoxy. Now I'm not going to put epoxy every possible place that it could conceivably go, but I am going to put it in many places, and that should really reinforce the strength of this thing. So if I only used wood glue here, I don't think I would feel confident launching it on a big 29mm motor, composite motor that is, because those can put out a lot of thrust, a lot of maximum thrust, and I don't know that the wood glue would necessarily be strong enough to hold up to that. And the last thing you want is for the motor mount to get ripped out while the motor is firing, because that would obviously be bad. Having that thing, well, it probably wouldn't make it too far through the rocket, but it would be dangerous, and you could certainly set the whole thing on fire. So something to be avoided. Alright, anyway, as mentioned, we are not actually going to measure anything, which, yeah, that does seem a little dodgy, but here's how this is going to end up working. This rocket, if you have a look at this tube, right? We already drew some lines on it. This one is going to use through the fin, or through the wall fin construction like so. Part of the strength of this is going to come because the fin is going to fit into a groove, a fairly tight groove, hopefully, in the motor mount itself. It's going to get glued in. It's going to have multiple anchor points. For this to work, of course, that means that we need to be somewhat careful about the motor mount here so that we have just enough space, not too much and not too little, but just enough space for the fins to fit in snugly, but yeah, not like that. So this is, I don't really love how loose this is, but I don't really have a lot of options at this point. Hopefully the bottom is tacked in well enough that I'm not going to bump it. This might actually be a good place to just let this sit and dry if you are like not filming yourself. But if you are, for whatever reason, yeah, I'm going to use the one of these fins at least as kind of a, well, it's not really an anchor. It's more like a measuring stick. So I'm going to tack this in on the top. So again, I'm going to put a decent amount of glue around here, and I'm doing my best not to bump the bottom centering ring if I can help it. I don't need to be knocking that down. Now, it doesn't look like this is, yeah, it's not quite as flush as I would like, but we can adjust once I get most of the glue in place. Okay. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to kind of spin the tube and make sure that the fin fits everywhere, that it's not, that I have this basically parallel with the other one so that it'll fit in, and fit in reasonably tightly, but not so tightly that I'm not going to be able to build the thing later. It would also be helpful to know if these were perpendicular to the tube itself. And that's also, yeah, see here, this part was not, because it's quite snug. We don't want that. Don't want it to be that snug. So spinning this around should ensure that there's at least enough room to get the fin in pretty much anywhere. Alright. I'm going to carefully smooth this out. I'm not going to really worry about getting a good solid fillet here because I'm going to fillet this with epoxy later. Oh, and look how crooked that is. That's pretty bad. In goes the fin again, and we'll just make sure that it's reasonably good, and then we can double check this way. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Alright, at this point I think it's actually a pretty good point to let this glue dry. The last fin is pretty easy to do. Yeah, you know what? We can put the last one, or not fin, the last centering ring, we can put that on. The last one is just going to go down here at the bottom, like that. So I'm going to tack this in here, down at the bottom. I'm not going to mess with that top. I want that to sit until the glue that I had on the other side is firmly set, and then I will anchor it in as well. Good enough. Okay, so again, this is not great. I'm going to push it all the way down. There we go, that's better. I'm going to push that all the way down. The green thing is underneath it, so that's making sure it's anchored nice and smoothly. This should just dry. I do not have all the gluing done that needs to be done, but I'm going to worry about that once I have enough glue set so that like none of this stuff is shifting around. And just to make sure before I walk away, I'm going to put the fin in this part here, spin it around, make sure that it fits everywhere. It does. Time to let this sit. Alright, I will finish this part up off camera, I think, and then it'll be time for construction, and that's going to use epoxy. So we'll see that part next. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.